The massive council chamber trembled as Ambassador Jackson's holographic message played for the 5th time. The crystalline walls, designed to amplify diplomatic voices across 12 different species, now carried a single human's words that made every alien representative shift uncomfortably in their seats. Representatives from 12 alien species watched in stunned silence as the humans' words echoed through their translators, each device struggling to capture the subtle menace beneath Jackson's polite tone. The United Earth Federation declines your surrender proposal. Jackson's voice carried a dangerous calm that made the chamber's atmospheric processors hum nervously. We suggest you step back before someone gets hurt. The silence that followed was deafening. Could practically hear the collective gulp of an entire galactic government, realizing it just been politely threatened by what they considered a primitive species, High Counselor. Vextal Vesk, multiple eyes widened in disbelief, his blue-scaled face cycling through colors that hadn't been seen since the Great Panic of 2847, for 300 years. No species had ever refused council mediation. The very concept was as foreign to them as refusing gravity itself. But here stood humanity, species that had barely crawled out of their single solar system, fighting the Catherian Empire for barely 18 months, yet they spoke like victors. Addressing defeated enemies, the audacity was breathtaking. The implications were terrifying. Impossible, hissed the Arcturian delegate, her serpentine form coiling tighter around her hover platform. They're outnumbered 100 to 1. Telepathic voice carried waves of genuine fear that rippled through the chamber's psychic dampeners. The mathematical reality was undeniable. Humanity possessed maybe 2,000 combat vessels against the Catherian Empire's 200,000 ship armada. Yet Jackson stood there in the hologram, hands clasped behind his back, looking for all the world like a man who'd just been asked to surrender his lunch money to a toddler. The disconnect was staggering. Either humanity was collectively insane, or the Council had fundamentally misunderstood something crucial about this conflict. The chamber erupted in nervous chatter as delegates began frantically consulting their data tablets. Voices rose in a dozen different languages, creating a cacophony of confusion and growing panic. The Veltari contingent's scales rippled with agitation patterns that roughly translated to "oh no, oh no, oh no" in their color-based language. The Draconian ambassador's wings fluttered with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for natural disasters. Fear rippled through the assembled aliens like a virus, jumping from species to species as they realized they might have gravely miscalculated humanity's position. But how could they have gotten it so wrong? The Council's intelligence networks were legendary. They'd successfully mediated conflicts between civilizations that could crack planets. Like Egg's High Counselor Vextel raised 6 arms for silence, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of diplomatic experience. Delegates, please. There must be some explanation. But even as he spoke, his confidence was cracking like thin ice. The human's message had been clear, direct, and utterly without fear. That alone should have been impossible. The Centauri observer, a being whose species had mastered interstellar travel when Earth was still cooling, leaned forward with obvious concern. Perhaps we should review the intelligence reports again. There might be factors we've overlooked. What factors? Snapped the Rigelian delegate, his multiple heads turning to face different speakers simultaneously. We've monitored every human transmission, cataloged every vessel, analyzed every tactical engagement. They're a single-system species with limited resources fighting a galactic empire. The math doesn't lie. But Ambassador Jackson's message suggested the math was lying, or at least telling a very incomplete story. The humans' casual dismissal of their generous surrender offer implied that Earth didn't just think they could win. They thought they already had one. The confidence was either masterful bluffing or terrifying certainty. The chamber's environmental systems kicked into overdrive as stress pheromones from a dozen different species began to overwhelm the air recyclers. The smell of fear, it turned out, was universal, regardless of whether you breathed oxygen, methane, or pure energy. We need to consider the possibility, whispered the Arcturian delegate, her voice barely audible even through the translators, that we don't understand humans at all. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a galactic government that prided itself on understanding every species within its sphere of influence, admitting ignorance about humanity was tantamount to admitting failure. But the alternative, that they'd accurately assessed human capabilities and were watching a species commit elaborate suicide, was somehow even more disturbing. As the delegates continued their frantic discussions, none of them noticed the small detail that would soon reshape their entire understanding of galactic power dynamics. In the corner of Jackson's holographic transmission, barely visible through the quantum static, was a tactical display showing human fleet positions of Earth's estimated military forces. Only 37 ships were assigned to the Catherian front. The rest remained in Sol System, apparently engaged in routine training exercises. If the Council had been capable of reading human tactical displays, they might have realized they weren't watching a desperate species make a final stand. They were watching an exterminator annoyed at being asked to negotiate with the pests. Speaking of power dynamics and compound effects, you might be surprised how small advantages can snowball into overwhelming dominance. Just like in my next video about the incredible power of compounding. Click the end screen to discover how tiny changes create massive results over time. Emergency klaxons screamed through Council headquarters like the dying cries of a wounded galaxy. The sound cut through every conversation, every political scheme, every carefully laid diplomatic plan with the surgical precision of pure terror. Admiral Kyle burst into the chamber, his uniform disheveled, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chamber's climate control systems working overtime. His face was pale, not the healthy pale of someone who spent time in artificial light, but the ghostly pale of someone who'd just witnessed the impossible. His hands shook as he activated the central hologram, fingers trembling against the control interface like a musician trying to play a symphony during an earthquake. You know that feeling when you're about to deliver news so bad that saying it out loud makes it real? That's exactly what Kyle was experiencing, magnified by the fact that his news would reshape galactic civilization forever. The Catherian Third Armada is gone, he announced, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone reporting their own death. 300 warships vanished. The words hit the chamber like a physical force. 300 warships didn't just disappear. The Catherian Third Armada wasn't some ragtag collection of patrol boats. These were massive dreadnoughts, each one capable of glassing an entire planet. The combined firepower of that fleet could have reduced Earth's solar system to cosmic dust without breaking a sweat. The hologram materialized in the center of the chamber, showing empty space where a massive alien fleet had been patrolling just hours before. The void was complete, absolute. As if the universe itself had reached out and erased 300 of the most advanced warships ever constructed. Only debris remained, scattered like leaves in a cosmic wind, twisted metal fragments that had once been proud vessels.
Ow.
Reduced to space junk, drifting aimlessly through the dark. But here's where it gets really interesting and terrifying. The debris field wasn't random. It was organized, almost artistic in its arrangement. Someone had very methodically, very precisely, dismantled an entire armada and left the pieces arranged in a pattern that roughly resembled a question mark. Coincidence? The delegates were beginning to suspect that humans didn't believe in coincidence. How many human ships were involved? Demanded the Centauri observer, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, a question everyone needed answered but dreaded hearing. In every previous galactic conflict, fleet actions required fleets. The basic mathematics of space warfare demanded overwhelming numbers to overcome prepared defenses. Kyle's voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. Intelligence reports ... 1. A single Earth destroyer called the Brooklyn. The chamber fell, deadly silent. Could have heard a pin drop if pins made any sound in the vacuum of space politics. The mathematical impossibility hit every delegate like a physical blow, as if the universe had just casually mentioned that 2 + 2 now equaled purple. One ship. One human destroyer. Not even a battleship or dreadnought, but a mid-sized vessel that probably carried fewer than 200 crew members had somehow eliminated 300 Catherian warships. The Catherians, who had conquered 47 worlds and had been the galaxy's boogeyman for 2 centuries, had just been swatted like flies by what amounted to a human patrol boat. Panic began to spread through the chamber, like wildfire in an oxygen-rich atmosphere. The carefully maintained composure of galactic diplomacy crumbled as delegates began to grasp the true scope of human capability. If one destroyer could eliminate an entire armada, what could humanity's main battle fleet accomplish? The implications were staggering and absolutely terrifying. The Veltari delegates' scales shifted. Through colors that hadn't been seen since their species' ancient texts about the end times. "This is impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. The evidence was literally floating in space above them. Debris patterns that spelled out humanity's casual dominance in twisted metal and shattered dreams. Maybe their weapons malfunctioned, suggested the Regelian observer, grasping at straws like a drowning man reaching for clouds. Some kind of chain reaction that destroyed their own fleet? Kyle shook his head grimly. Negative. Our sensors detected multiple energy signatures consistent with controlled detonations. Someone very deliberately took apart that armada piece by piece. He paused, consulting his data tablet with trembling fingers. The Brooklyn was detected entering the engagement zone at 0347 hours, 0352 hours. All Catherian vessels had ceased transmitting. 5 minutes. An entire armada eliminated in 5 minutes by a single human ship. The delegates were doing mental math that made their various brains hurt. At that rate, humanity's full battle fleet could theoretically eliminate every military vessel in the galaxy before lunch. The Arcturian delegates' serpentine form coiled tighter around her hover platform. What about survivors? Escape pods? Distress signals? None, Kyle replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The Brooklyn apparently collected all survivors and transferred them to a prison transport. Captain Morrison's after-action report described the engagement as routine pest control with minimal complications. Routine pest control. The phrase echoed through the chamber like a death knell. The galaxy's most feared military force had been classified as a minor pest control problem by a single human captain. The psychological impact was devastating, but wait, there's more. The truly terrifying part wasn't just the efficiency of the attack. It was the complete lack of emotion in the human response. No celebration, no boasting, no propaganda broadcasts. Just a routine report filed by a captain who seemed mildly annoyed at having his patrol schedule disrupted. The chamber's environmental systems began working overtime as stress. Pheromones from 12 different species started overwhelming the air recyclers. The smell of collective fear was becoming overwhelming, but nobody seemed to notice. They were too busy trying to process the fact that everything they thought they knew about military power had just been proven catastrophically wrong, High Counselor. Vexel finally found his voice. Admiral, are you absolutely certain about these numbers? Kyle nodded slowly. I triple-checked everything. Brooklyn is a standard Terran destroyer. Crew complement, 108.7. Standard armament for its class. Nothing special according to our intelligence files. Nothing special. A standard human destroyer had just redefined the meaning of overwhelming force. It was apparently nothing special by human standards. The implications were keeping everyone awake at night, assuming they could still sleep after learning this information, just like small actions can compound into massive results over time. Humanity's apparently casual military superiority was about to reshape galactic civilization, speaking of compound effects. You'll be amazed at how tiny advantages can snowball into overwhelming dominance. Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding by clicking the end screen. Within days, the reports flooded in like a tsunami of disbelief and terror. The communication networks of the Galactic Council, designed to handle diplomatic correspondence across 12 star systems, were overwhelmed by a constant stream of impossible news. Each report arrived with the precise timing of a cosmic clockwork, methodically documenting the systematic dismantling of what had been considered the galaxy's most formidable military force. The Catherian Second Fleet obliterated. Not defeated, not damaged, not retreating, completely obliterated. 250 warships that had terrorized civilizations for decades were now nothing more than expanding clouds of superheated plasma drifting through space. The fleet that had once conquered the Reguline homeworld in a single afternoon had been erased from existence with surgical precision. Their fortress worlds, silent graveyards. These weren't just military installations. They were entire planets converted into impregnable strongholds, each one protected by orbital defense platforms that could shred incoming fleets like paper. The Catherian fortress world of Nexus Prime had withstood a 50-year siege by the combined forces of 6 different species. Now its communication arrays broadcast nothing but static, its massive defense guns pointing uselessly at empty space. 12 separate battle zones showed the same terrifying pattern, overwhelming alien forces simply ceasing to exist. The mathematical consistency was almost artistic in its precision. No matter how many ships the Catherians deployed, no matter how sophisticated their tactics, the result was always the same. Complete annihilation followed by eerie silence. But here's where it gets really disturbing. And I mean genuinely nightmare-inducing. The human forces weren't even trying hard. Intelligence reports suggested they were operating with the same casual efficiency you'd expect from an exterminator dealing with a particularly stubborn ant infestation. No desperate last stands, no heroic sacrifices, no dramatic fleet actions. Just workmanlike elimination of what they clearly considered a minor inconvenience. Dr. Elena Martinez, Council's human liaison, stood before the emergency assembly like a doctor preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. Her usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the barely contained fury of someone who'd been forced to translate her own species. Casual destruction of galactic order. Her report made several delegates physically ill, and we're talking about species that had evolved from predators themselves. "We've intercepted human military communications," she began, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. The translator system struggled to capture the complex emotions in her words, professional duty warring with personal horror at what she was about to reveal. "They're not celebrating victories. They're complaining about overtime," the statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Celebrating victories would have been understandable, even expected. Boasting about superior firepower, claiming manifest destiny, declaring themselves the rightful rulers of the galaxy, these were normal responses to military success. But complaining about overtime, that suggested a level of casual dominance, that made every delegate's blood run cold. The draconian. Representative scales darkened through colors that hadn't been seen since his species' ancient war chronicles. "What do you mean?" asked, though his voice suggested he really didn't. "Want to know the answer?" Elena consulted her data tablet with trembling hands. Captain Ryan of the Denver reported to command. "Another pest control run complete. When can we go home?" The words fell like hammer blows against the chamber's crystalline walls. "Captain, Sarah Johnson of the Phoenix has complained that these cleanup operations are interfering with scheduled maintenance cycles." The phrases were devastating in their casual indifference. Pest control, cleanup operations, scheduled maintenance cycles. The humans were discussing the elimination of galactic civilization's greatest military threat, with the same tone most people used to complain about mowing the lawn on weekends. Elena's words sent waves of terror through the chamber that the environmental systems couldn't filter out. The delegates weren't just afraid, they were experiencing the kind of existential dread that comes from realizing you've fundamentally misunderstood your place in the universe. They'd been thinking of themselves as the adults supervising a playground squabble, only to discover they were actually insects watching giants discuss landscaping. High Counselor Vextel felt his blood freeze as the implications cascaded through his consciousness like an avalanche of cosmic horror. Humans viewed the galaxy's most feared empire as nothing more than an annoyance. The Catherian Empire, which had conquered 47 worlds and maintained a reign of terror for 2 centuries, was apparently worth less consideration than a scheduling conflict. "There's more," Elena continued, her professional composure finally cracking completely. "We intercepted a conversation between Admiral Roberts and his wife. When she asked about his day, he replied, "Oh, the usual. Cleaned out another nest of those bug people. Should be home for dinner Thursday." The casual domesticity of the conversation was somehow more terrifying than any military briefing. This wasn't conquest. It was extermination performed with the same thoughtless efficiency most people brought to household chores. The humans weren't expanding their empire. They were simply removing obstacles to their daily routine. But here's the truly chilling part. The part that made even the battle-hardened draconian delegate visibly shudder. The humans were being careful. Analysis of the battle sites showed precision that went beyond military necessity. They were deliberately avoiding collateral damage, carefully preserving civilian populations, methodically documenting their actions for what appeared to be some kind of intergalactic regulatory compliance. The realization hit the chamber like a physical blow. The humans weren't just overwhelmingly powerful, they were following rules. They were operating under some kind of ethical framework that treated even their casual genocide as a regulated activity requiring proper documentation and minimal environmental impact. Admiral Thompson's report to Earth Command, Alina read, with a voice that had gone completely flat, requested permission to accelerate the timeline for pest management operations. Because the current schedule is interfering with fleet training exercise Bravo 7, the silence that followed was deafening. The humans wanted to speed up their annihilation of the Catharian Empire because it was interfering with their training exercises. They weren't even using their real military capabilities. They were treating this as a minor distraction from their actual priorities. The mathematical reality was becoming clear, and it was absolutely terrifying. If humanity's casual pest control operations could eliminate entire armadas, what would happen if they actually decided to take the galaxy seriously? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and nobody wanted to discover the answer. Just like small habits compound into life-changing results over time. Humanity's apparently casual military actions were reshaping galactic civilization one pest control operation at a time. Speaking of compound effects, you'll be shocked at how tiny advantages can snowball into overwhelming dominance. Discover the incredible power of compounding by clicking the end screen to my next video. The breakthrough came when Council Intelligence cracked a routine human communication, and by routine, we mean the kind of casual conversation that would make galactic historians weep. The intelligence team had been working around the clock, using every sophisticated code-breaking algorithm and quantum decryption method at their disposal, only to discover that humans weren't even trying to hide their communications. They were chatting about reshaping galactic civilization with the same casual tone most people use to discuss weekend plans. The casual conversation between Fleet Admiral Roberts and Commander Lisa made the assembled delegates physically recoil in horror. Picture this: 12 different species, each representing millions of years of evolution, is collectively experiencing the same gut-wrenching terror that comes from realizing you've been living in a completely different reality than you thought. The translation systems struggled to process not just the words, but the casual indifference that made each phrase a psychological weapon. "Hey Tom, how's the cleanup going out there?" Lisa's voice carried the relaxed tone of someone asking about yard work, not the systematic dismantling of a galactic empire. The word cleanup hit the delegates like a physical blow. They'd been thinking of this as a war, a struggle between civilizations, a clash of ideologies. The humans were treating it like spring cleaning. "Almost done, Lisa." Command says to go easy on the new weapons. Something about not wanting to completely terrify the neighbors. The phrase "new weapons" sent a collective shudder through the chamber. If the devastating efficiency they'd witnessed so far was humanity going easy, what did their actual military capability look like? The delegates were doing mental math that made their various brains hurt, trying to calculate the implications of a species that considered galactic conquest a minor inconvenience requiring restraint. But here's where it gets really terrifying. And I mean genuinely sleep-diving, nightmare-inducing, terrifying. The humans were holding back, not because they lacked the power to finish quickly, but because they were concerned about their neighbors' mental health. They were deliberately prolonging a conflict that was costing lives and resources because they didn't want to cause a galactic panic attack. Too late for that. The council's already wetting themselves over our aggressive expansion. The laughter in Lisa's voice was perhaps the most chilling sound the delegates had ever heard. It wasn't cruel or malicious. It was genuinely amused. The humans found the council's terror funny, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because the very concept of human aggressive expansion was apparently absurd to them. Aggressive? We've been playing defense for months. If we were actually trying, this would have been over in a week. The words hit the chamber like a cascade of cosmic horror. Playing defense for months. The systematic destruction of the galaxy's most feared military force had been humanity playing defense. They weren't even trying to win. They were simply annoyed at being attacked and were casually swatting away the irritation. The mathematical implications were staggering. If defensive operations could eliminate entire armadas, what would an actual human offensive look like? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon that nobody wanted to fire. You know what kills me? Tom continued, his voice carrying the weary tone of someone dealing with a particularly stubborn household problem. The Catherians keep sending bigger fleets, like we're going to be impressed by quantity. Yesterday they showed up with 500 ships. 500. I almost felt bad for them. The transmission continued, but High Counselor Vextel had heard enough. His multiple eyes were cycling through colors that hadn't been seen since his species' ancient texts about the end times. The humans weren't just winning. They were deliberately holding back to avoid causing a galactic panic. The irony was devastating. The Council's attempt to prevent panic had led them directly into the heart of their worst nightmare. The Council was trying to mediate a war between gods and ants, and had somehow convinced themselves the gods needed their help. The realization crashed over the assembled delegates like a wave of cosmic insignificance. They'd been operating under the assumption that they were the mature, experienced adults supervising a playground squabble. In reality, they were insects trying to negotiate between a human and a slightly smaller insect. The real problem, Lisa's voice continued through the speakers, is that we're running out of prison ships. Command wants to know what to do with all these Catherian survivors. Apparently, processing this many POS is creating a paperwork nightmare. Paperwork nightmare. The phrase encapsulated everything terrifying about humanity's casual dominance. They weren't struggling with military logistics or strategic planning. They were struggling with the administrative burden of processing. Too many prisoners. The Catherian Empire's entire military force had become a filing problem. But wait, there's more. The truly disturbing part wasn't just the efficiency of human military operations. It was the complete integration of overwhelming force with bureaucratic process. The humans were conducting galactic conquest with the same systematic approach most civilizations use for tax collection. Tom, did you see the latest efficiency report? Lisa asked. Man says we're exceeding projected timelines by 30%. They want us to slow down so the diplomatic corps can keep up with the paperwork. The delegates were experiencing a collective psychological breakdown. Humans were being asked to slow down their conquest because their own diplomats couldn't process the surrenders fast enough. The administrative tail was wagging the military dog, and the military dog was apparently capable of eating the entire galaxy as an afternoon snack. The Arcturian delegate's serpentine form was coiled so tightly around her hover platform that the metal was beginning to creak. They're complaining about going too fast, she whispered. They're worried about overwhelming their own bureaucracy. The implications were mind-numbing. Humanity's military capability was apparently constrained not by enemy resistance, but by the speed at which their own government could process the resulting paperwork. They were operating at a level of casual dominance that made logistics, not warfare, their primary concern. You know what's really funny? Tom's voice carried a note of genuine amusement. The Council keeps trying to negotiate a peace treaty. They think this is some kind of territorial dispute. They have no idea we're just trying to get these bugs to stop attacking our shipping lanes so we can get back to normal business. Normal business. The phrase echoed through the chamber like a death knell. Humanity's normal business was apparently so important that the systematic elimination of a galactic empire was considered a minor interruption to their schedule. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The delegates weren't just afraid, they were experiencing the kind of existential crisis that comes from realizing everything you thought you knew about reality was fundamentally wrong, just like small misunderstandings can compound into massive miscalculations over time. The Council's failure to grasp humanity's true capabilities had led them into a situation beyond their worst nightmares. Speaking of compound effects, you'll be amazed at how tiny advantages can snowball into overwhelming dominance. Discover the incredible power of compounding by clicking the end screen to my next video. The final emergency session convened in absolute secrecy, behind quantum encrypted barriers that could theoretically hide the meeting from the all-seeing eyes of cosmic surveillance networks. The truth was too dangerous for public knowledge, too devastating for the average galactic citizen to comprehend without suffering a complete psychological breakdown. Humanity wasn't just another spacefaring species that had stumbled into interstellar politics. They were apex predators who had somehow wandered into a galaxy of prey. And the prey had just spent months trying to teach the predators about proper table manners. The chamber's usual grandeur felt hollow now, like a theater set after the audience had gone home. The crystalline walls that had once amplified diplomatic voices across 12 different species now seemed to whisper warnings about the fragility of everything they'd built. The delegates who filed in weren't the confident representatives of galactic civilization, they were survivors of a reality check so brutal it had left psychological scars that would take generations to heal. We need to completely restructure our understanding, High Counselor Vexthal announced to the terrified delegates, his voice carrying the weight of someone announcing the end of an era. Everything we thought we knew about galactic power was wrong. The statement wasn't just an admission of error. It was a confession that 3 centuries of galactic governance had been built on a foundation of cosmic ignorance. The silence that followed was deafening. You know that moment when you realize you've been playing chess while your opponent has been playing three-dimensional warfare? That's exactly what every delegate was experiencing, magnified by the fact that the stakes weren't just political embarrassment. They were the survival of galactic civilization as they knew it. The Veltari delegate's voice shook with pure fear, her scale cycling through colors that roughly translated to "Oh gods, we're all going to die" in her species' chromatic language. They could have conquered us all before we even knew they existed. They chose diplomacy instead. The words carried the hollow tone of someone who'd just realized they'd been living in a fairy tale, where the monsters were actually the heroes all along. But here's the truly mind-bending part, the part that made seasoned diplomats question their own sanity. Humanity's choice of diplomacy wasn't strategic weakness or moral superiority. It was the equivalent of a nuclear power choosing to negotiate with a neighbor's complaints about loud music instead of just annexing their property. The humans had been polite, not because they had to be, but because they wanted to be. Which means, added the Arcturian representative, barely containing his panic as his serpentine form coiled tighter around his hover platform when they refused. Our peace negotiations, they weren't being defiant. They were being merciful. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Merciful. The humans had politely declined the Council's generous offer to surrender because they were trying to spare everyone's feelings. The chamber fell silent as the implications crashed over them like a tsunami of cosmic horror. The Galactic Council had just tried to lecture a dragon about playing nice with sheep. They'd approached beings capable of casual galactic conquest and offered them diplomatic mediation, like concerned parents breaking up a playground fight. The absurdity would have been hilarious if it weren't so absolutely terrifying. High Counselor Vexthal made the decision that would reshape galactic civilization forever, though at the time it felt more like signing his own species' death warrant. Draft a new message to Earth. This time, we ask them what they want from us. The reversal was complete and devastating. The galactic government that had spent centuries telling other species how to behave was now asking for instructions from the new kids on the block. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the last Catherian fleet broadcast its surrender to Captain Mike aboard the destroyer Phoenix. The transmission was pathetic in its desperation, a one-sprout empire reduced to begging for mercy from a single human ship. Captain Mike's response? was the same measured politeness that had characterized all human communications throughout this entire cosmic misunderstanding. Surrender, accepted, stand down, and prepare for processing. The words were professional, efficient, and completely without malice. Mike sounded like a customer service representative handling a routine return, not a military commander accepting the surrender of a galactic empire. The casual competence was perhaps more terrifying than any battle cry could have been, but here's what really kept the delegates awake at night, assuming they could still sleep after learning all this. The humans weren't gloating. They weren't celebrating their victory or making demands for tribute. They were simply processing the situation with the same systematic efficiency they brought to everything else, treating the collapse of galactic civilization as another item on their administrative to-do list. The age of human dominance hadn't begun with conquest or declaration. It had begun with humanity's patient tolerance for a council that had completely misunderstood who they were dealing with. There were no dramatic proclamations, no reshaping of galactic law, no demands for submission. The humans simply continued being themselves, while everyone else slowly realized that the universe had fundamentally changed around them. The galaxy trembled, and humanity barely noticed. They were too busy processing prisoner transfers, filing diplomatic reports, and complaining about the overtime requirements for managing yet another pest control operation. The casual indifference was more devastating than any military parade could have been. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council quietly began restructuring itself around a new reality. Trade agreements were renegotiated with extreme deference. Military deployment schedules were carefully reviewed to ensure they didn't interfere with human shipping lanes. Diplomatic protocols were rewritten to emphasize the importance of not annoying the nice humans who could accidentally destroy entire civilizations while trying to maintain their normal business schedules. The transformation was complete, total, and accomplished, without humanity firing a single shot in anger. They'd reshaped galactic civilization through the simple act of being themselves, while everyone else slowly realized what themselves actually meant. The universe had gained new management, and the new management was too polite to mention the change in ownership. History would record this as the moment galactic civilization grew up, though it felt more like the moment everyone else realized they'd been children playing with toy soldiers, while the adults were busy with real work. The age of human dominance had arrived not with a bang, but with a polite request to keep the noise down. Just like small changes can compound into massive transformations over time, humanity's casual competence had reshaped an entire galaxy without anyone really noticing until it was too late. Speaking of compound effects, you'll be amazed at how tiny advantages can snowball into overwhelming dominance. Discover the incredible power of compounding by clicking the end screen to my next video.